This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. The country's top intelligence official says he's never seen things more dangerous during a half-century in the spy business. This flies in the face of a claim from the president's top diplomat that Americans are safer than ever. The argument over terror threats comes on the 22nd anniversary of the first World Trade Center bombing. 6 people were killed and more than 1,000 injured when a truck bomb exploded underneath the center's North Tower in 1993. 8 years later, of course, both towers came down during the 9/11 attacks. We have Fox team coverage of a dramatically different terror situation 22 years later. Catherine Herridge with the increasing worry over homegrown terrorism. But we begin with Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry and the wildly conflicting statements we're getting about how dangerous things are now. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. Remember last fall, it was the president throwing James Clapper under the bus by saying it was Clapper who had admitted underestimating ISIS. Today, it was Clapper saying John Kerry may have been wrong about how safe America really is. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper was blunt in telling Congress that thanks in large part to ISIS, the world just experienced the deadliest year in terror ever recorded.
When the final accounting is done, 2014 will have been the most lethal year for global terrorism in the 45 years such data has been compiled.
Another mixed message from advisors to President Obama, who in 2014 called ISIS the JV squad, and then more recently claimed terror was being hyped by the media. While just 24 hours before Clapper spoke, Secretary of State John Kerry insisted Americans have never been safer.
Despite ISIL, despite the visible killings that you see and how horrific they are, we are actually living in a period of less daily threat to Americans and to people in the world than normally, less deaths, less violent deaths today.
The former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, ripped Kerry's flowery assessment by declaring to Fox, quote, Secretary Kerry is out of touch with reality. He clearly is not listening to the entire U.S. intelligence community. He is not reading any of the intelligence or other things that have been written over the last few weeks, months, years. White House spokesman Josh Earnest tried to square the statements by saying Clapper acknowledged the threat from ISIS, but Kerry noted their capacity to carry out attacks is being diminished.
How could Secretary Kerry make the claim to the American people, to the world, that we're safer than we were before?
Well, I think he could do so with the evidence on his side. What he was able to demonstrate, and I think what he was discussing, is the success that our military campaign has had in applying significant pressure.
Except Syrian activists say the number of Christians abducted by ISIS in the northeast part of the country has risen to 220, while ISIS released a video today allegedly showing the militants using sledgehammers to smash ancient artifacts in Iraq. Although new airstrikes killed 17 ISIS terrorists and narrowly missed hitting their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, a reason why Earnest said the U.S.-led campaign has slowed what he called ISIS's reign of terror. Though last summer, the press secretary claimed the president's policies had made the world more tranquil, a word he can't quite use anymore.
I stand by the fact that what the president has done on numerous occasions has used American influence, American diplomacy, and American military power to try to make the world a safer place for the American people.
Now, still, Earnest noted that ISIS remains very dangerous, admitting there have been several tragedies where Americans have been killed, with the threat and the potential of more to come. Brett?
Ed Henry live in the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. As dangerous as ISIS is to Americans and others abroad, there are growing concerns about what ISIS sympathizers could do here. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has that part of the story tonight. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, Brett, the FBI director says they are finding credible terrorism leads in every part of the country.
We have investigations of people in various stages of radicalizing in all 50 states. I tell my state and local partners, this is about all of us being connected tightly to each other. This isn't a New York phenomenon or a Washington phenomenon. This is all 50 states.
Privately, law enforcement officials reject the idea that American homegrown recruits are not the real deal, and the same officials tell Fox News U.S. citizens could easily take on high-profile roles like the ISIS executioner Jihad John, who is a British national. 3 New York City men arraigned this week are now among a growing number of Americans who are alleged ISIS supporters. According to court documents, the men, all in their 20s, were determined to support the terror group and launch attacks inside the U.S. if they couldn't reach Syria or Iraq. DNI Clapper also testified today 180 Americans fit a similar profile as the threat expands and fragments.
In my 50-plus years in the intelligence business, I don't know of a time that has been more beset by challenges and crises around the world. I worry a lot about the safety and security of this country. The homegrown violent extremists continue to pose the most likely threat to the homeland.
The prosecution this week of an alleged al-Qaeda operative, Abed Nasir, drawing on intelligence from Osama bin Laden's compound, show the terror leader was determined to attack U.S. targets and American recruits were the gold standard. A separate review of court records by Fox shows at least 35 Americans or legal permanent residents have tried to join or provide support to ISIS since March of 2013. That averages an alleged case of homegrown terrorism in this country every 2 to 3 weeks, Brett.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
A man portrayed as one of al-Qaeda's early leaders has been convicted of conspiracy in the deadly bombings of 2 U.S. embassies in Africa. Prosecutors say Khalid al-Fawaz was a close confidant of Osama bin Laden and helped get his message to the media. 224 people were killed in the 1998 bombings of the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The Obama administration is reversing itself and sending 2 high-level figures to the meeting of America's leading pro-Israel lobby this weekend. National Security Advisor Susan Rice and UN Ambassador Samantha Power will emphasize the U.S. commitment to Israel and make the case for nuclear talks with Iran. U.S. officials had earlier floated the idea of sending a non-cabinet level representative as a protest of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's upcoming speech to Congress. Expanding problems tonight for Hillary Clinton over her family's charitable foundation. It turns out the organization continued to take foreign donations during Clinton's time as Secretary of State. Correspondent Kevin Cork tonight on the ethical and political stakes.
Call it a broken promise. A $500,000 donation from Algeria to the Clinton Foundation in 2010, not properly disclosed to the State Department, a violation of an agreement with the Obama administration, signed off on by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Senior Policy Advisor Valerie Jarrett.
They've shown a commitment. Their commitment has been over and above the letter of the law, and that's been consistently followed.
Not so in the case of the Algerian money. The foundation says it was for Haiti earthquake relief, but admits the State Department, quote, should have also been formally informed.
It is the responsibility of the Department of State to determine how compliance was enforced when it comes to the Memorandum of Understanding.
But it's the timing of the donation that raises serious questions about whether that money bought Algerian interest and others more access. The contribution, plus another $420,000 in lobbying efforts, coincided with a spike in activity, with 12 meetings between Algerian lobbyists and the State Department that year, according to the Washington Post. Then in 2012, Secretary Clinton met with the president of Algeria during a visit to that country. Algeria was one of a number of foreign governments making huge donations while Clinton was the nation's top diplomat, including Kuwait and Oman, as well as Qatar, which has been accused of backing Hamas and other Islamic militant groups. The disclosures, a worry for Democrats ahead of a potential Clinton White House run, with critics from watchdog groups now wondering if rules against accepting foreign money by U.S. political candidates are being circumvented.
The public has been unable to get these records for years and years after she's been Secretary of State, so there was really no transparency. And yes, I'd consider it a broken promise that if we were supposed to be able to know whether or not any of these conflicts existed, the public was kept in the dark.
Since 2001, the Clinton Foundation has raised some $2 billion, a third of those giving more than $1 million in that time, foreign individuals and governments. Brett?
Kevin, thank you. More on this with the panel. Republicans anxious to run against Hillary Clinton, the expected Democratic nominee in the 2016 presidential race, are courting conservatives tonight just outside Washington. It's the annual conservative get-together known as CPAC. Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron is there and reports from National Harbor, Maryland.
CPAC is always a conservative proving ground for GOP presidential candidates, and this year they face direct questions from conservative pundits. Laura Ingraham asked Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey how he can beat former Florida Governor Jeb Bush with his famous family and huge donor base.
If the elites in Washington who make backroom deals decide who the president's going to be, then he's definitely the front runner. If the people of the United States decide to pick the next president of the United States and they want someone who looks at them in the eye, connects with them, and is one of them, I'll do okay if I run.
Neurosurgeon Ben Carson kicked off the conference with a denunciation of the left as, quote, purveyors of division, and said the country needs a new direction. But CPACers demand loyalty to principle and want their 2016 candidates to oppose Common Core education standards and immigration reform that grants citizenship to undocumented immigrants. Firebrand freshman Texas Senator Ted Cruz takes a backseat to no one in the GOP.
If a candidate says they oppose President Obama's illegal and unconstitutional executive amnesty, terrific. If a candidate says they oppose Common Core, fantastic. When have you stood up and fought against it?
Carly Fiorina, the only Republican woman eyeing a presidential run, blasted Hillary Clinton, using the former Secretary of State's own tweets to illustrate the latest Clinton ethical controversy and hypocrisy.
Explain why we should accept that the millions and millions of dollars that have flowed into the Clinton Foundation from foreign governments do not represent a conflict of interest. She tweets about women's rights in this country and takes money from governments that deny women the most basic human rights.
Surging in the early polls, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker drew the biggest crowd of the day.
As of next week, Wisconsin will become the 25th state in America that allows workers the freedom to choose whether they want to work for a company and be in a union or not.
When protesters began to shout, Walker rallied the crowd to drown them out.
Those voices can't drown out the voices of the millions of Americans who want us to stand up for the hardworking taxpayers. As long as I'm a leader, I'll continue to do that going forward.
Governor Walker and virtually all of the Republican candidates spent a considerable amount of time criticizing the president's what they consider to be reluctance to aggressively go after radical Islamic terrorism. And in the case of Governor Walker, he actually said that because he had faced 100,000 demonstrators, referring to the political battles in Wisconsin, he'd be ready to take the appropriate courage around the country. That raised some eyebrows and could cause Mr. Walker some blowback. Jeb Bush speaks tomorrow, and he faces some big challenges here as well, Brett. There are some of the CPACers who think that he's insufficiently conservative and are threatening to walk out. And Bush's aides are here feverishly working to avert that tomorrow. Brett.
Carl Cameron live at CPAC. Carl, thanks. Attorney General Eric Holder is snubbing Fox News Channel on his way out. Fox News Channel's Executive Vice President of News, Michael Clementi, issued this statement, quote, "We learned today that Attorney General Eric Holder has conducted interviews with ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Politico while excluding Fox News. The Attorney General's decision does a deep disservice to America's largest cable news audience and the interests of a free press. Ultimately, however, we're not surprised that Holder would try to evade a thorough accounting of his record in office, including his decision to investigate our chief Washington correspondent James Rosen through an illegal seizure of emails and phone records of Rosen and his parents. Late today, the DOJ press office said they, quote, look forward to accommodating Fox News at a future time. We're hopeful but realistic about whether that will actually happen. On a personal note, last year I spoke to the Attorney General at an event here in Washington about him doing an interview with me on Special Report. We have renewed that interview request with the Justice Department every month for the past 9 months. Meanwhile, today the Senate Judiciary Committee has voted to confirm President Obama's pick to replace Holder. Loretta Lynch still has to be confirmed by the entire Senate, but that vote is expected to pass. National Intelligence Chief James Clapper, you saw him earlier. He said today cyber attacks are even more dangerous than terrorism to the U.S. Clapper says the cyber threat from Russia is more severe than previously thought. He says saboteurs, spies, and thieves are expanding their attacks against a vulnerable American internet infrastructure. Speaking of the internet, some big changes are coming. Today, the FCC approved sweeping new rules that no member of the public has even seen. Correspondent Peter Ducey reports on what these new regulations may mean for you, your business, and your family.
Ready? set, slow.
The ayes have it.
Just like that, the government grabbed control of the internet, approving 322 pages of new regulations that may limit broadband speeds and competition in what critics are calling a power grab.
The internet as you know it has now ended, but the government now controls what happens there and will control it only more so.
And now new concerns the government can soon start regulating content as well. Entrepreneur Mark Cuban, who made billions on tech companies, tweeted today how long after TV is treated like any website video before the FCC steps in and applies its decency standards to all streaming video. Who wrote these new rules? The FCC's Democratic Commissioner Tom Wheeler is doing little to clear up speculation that the White House may have influenced the independent agency. First, there was this.
Presidents always communicate their opinions to the FCC.
But a little while later, it sounded like the administration had a little less impact.
We made this decision with independence and wisdom.
On Capitol Hill, where lawmakers were cut out of the rulemaking process, Republicans are hoping for better luck with lawsuits.
As a result, this is going to be tied up in the courts for some time to come. And the problem with that is it creates uncertainty. It means less investment in the build out of the internet, which is what we all should have as a goal.
Democratic supporters say suing won't work.
I don't doubt that someone is going to sue, but I think the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has already made it quite clear that the probability of success of that appeal is going to be very low.
Either way, challenges take time, but service providers are affected now. Verizon says these are 1930s rules, even posting a lengthy statement in Morse code.
So, will you be impacted by today's ruling? Probably. There's a possibility that a couple months from now you could be watching Netflix and President Underwood. And if the picture keeps freezing, driving you crazy, any short-term gains in fairness could fall like a house of cards.
Ah, there you
go. So if you're going to watch, do it before it slows down.
Nicely written, Peter. Thank you. National Intelligence Director Chief James Clapper will have more on that story with the panel. He says the president's Obamacare chief, meantime, says there's no backup plan if the Supreme Court strikes down federal subsidies. That's coming up. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 10 in Phoenix, where a pair of quick-footed llamas dashed in and out of traffic in a retirement community. If you saw this live on Fox today, it was some compelling television. Shepard Smith leading us through the live llama chase. The llamas were eventually lassoed and brought under control. No word yet where they came from. Fox 9 in Minneapolis as a federal judge clears the way for Viking star Adrian Peterson to be reinstated. Peterson was suspended through at least April 15th over the way he punished his young son. The judge ruled that the NFL arbiter disregarded the league rules. And this is a live look at San Diego from Fox 5. The big story out there tonight, inspiration from an American hero, retired Marine Sergeant Turgal, who survived devastating injuries, as you see, in Afghanistan. He shared his story with the Coronado High School boys lacrosse team, which is dealing with the recent death of a former teammate. It's the story out there. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.